The weather had turned. The oppressive heat of summer had given way to the pleasantly warm days and chilly nights of autumn. A day of fate, a day of destiny. A seventh grader in a small rural Midwestern town would be forever changed. Greetings and salutations. I am the Nemean Beard. Two things to do. I would appreciate a like and a subscribe, and I'm going to have a drink of this coffee here. It's not bad. This is Death Wish coffee. I'm not endorsing them. Um, it is definitely strong, but the flavor isn't necessarily my cup of tea. I've come to find that in this age of dark roasts, I actually kind of prefer a bit of a lighter roast. And yeah, so not bad though. It's not bad at all. Uh, so, first video, I'm excited and I hope it is a source of inspiration and help to game master and player alike. I'm going to recount some of my experiences over the past 25 years of doing this, of playing tabletop role playing games. I apologize for that. I realize that you're not here for coffee advice, that you are in fact here for some good Dungeons and Dragons goodness. RPGs. So, do you remember the first time that you played D&D? An RPG? I do. I was actually kidnapped. Now, this is a true story, by the way, more or less. As dungeon masters, we are storytellers, among other things, and as with most tales, our starting point demands some context and backstory. I grew up, like I said, in a small rural farming community in the Midwest. While it wasn't religious, it was definitely conservative. It was classically like Reagan's America. I remember, well, the kind of the best way to describe it is, on the first season of Stranger Things when they discover Eleven is living at the Wheelers or has been staying there, and Mr. Wheeler looks at the fake government agent, the Department of Energy guys, and he says, "Oh my God, is she Russian?" That was it to a T. It was small. Everyone knew each other. It was very homogenous, and it was really easy to fit in. Actually, if you looked, if you were just like everyone else. Now, don't get me wrong. I treasure my childhood. It was a great place to grow up. I consider myself fortunate. But when things like the skateboarding culture, thrashers by the local vernacular, and newer music trends breached our gentle shores, they were quickly disapproved of and dismissed, and they would not be tolerated. Prejudice and superstitions were kind of deeply ingrained. In fact, I was told that there were witches that lived in the ruins of the old opera house, that there was a ghost that lived in the cemetery north of town. I was also under no circumstance ever to play Dungeons and Dragons. While since age 4, I could look through the Savage Sword of Conan, watch any sword and sorcery flick I wanted to. However, D&D was strictly forbidden. It was off. D&D was off limits. Everyone had seen the 60-minute special. They had heard the stories of horror and evil recounted from authorities of truth like Geraldo and Donahue. They had even seen the true story of the made-for-TV movie Cruel Doubt, starring Gwyneth Paltrow and the great Dennis Farina. And everyone had a cousin whose brothers, sisters, roommates, neighbors, mom tried to burn the books, and the books resisted the fire as if they were cursed. And even though this was the 90s, the satanic panic was still alive and well where I grew up. Myself being a young man who liked most medieval fantasy and sword and sorcery media, movies such as Dragon Slayer, The Beastmaster. I liked authors like Tolkien and Robert E. Howard and David Gemmell, but I just really loved the fantasy genre because of the art, and all of its illustration was kind of forbidden fruit. Then a fateful day, like I said, the stars aligned. It was late fall, my 7th grade year. A group of older kids who were part of the aforementioned thrasher culture, they pulled up as I walked to the local mini mart for a pop. That's how you can tell I'm from the Midwest, because I call it pop. They rolled their window down and they stared at me. So Fearing that I might maybe catch a beating, I tried a little diplomacy with a universal greeting. What's up? Get in, the oldest one said. You're going to play D&D with us. I wasn't quite sure what was happening, but I offered little resistance and climbed into the already full Geo Metro. For those of you who don't know, a Geo Metro is basically the automobile industry's bag of holding. We went to another kid's garage, and it was kind of like a hideout. They had a password to get in. They had Iron Maiden posters and cover of D&D source books pinned up on the wall. There was a little bit of an introduction process, but finally I was sure I was safe, and they explained that they really did just want me to play D&D. I made a thief. Valkar Gamchin was his name. I had actually wanted to make a ninja, but this was close enough, and I wasn't about to complain. I don't really remember too much about the first session, but it made a lifetime worth of impact on me. Here's what I do remember. The rest of the party found me chained to the wall in an ancient castle that these lizard men had occupied. Excuse me. They asked me why I was chained, and Dale, the dungeon master, looked over and he said, "You're a thief. You came here to get treasure." I said, "I came here to steal some gold." The other rogue, Loki Shaw, he was kind of threatened by another thief's presence, so he extracted a tithe. He said he would pick the lock and let me out of my chains if I agreed to give him 10% of everything I made from dungeoneering. I started to resent that deal down the road, and I would often pick his pocket and raid his backpack while he slept. But back to the adventure. The first thing past the introduction that I really remember is at some point I discovered a room that had a small chest atop a pedestal, and it was like sunk in about 2 feet of water. It was kind of like an Irish pub, how you walk in and it's all sunk down. So after scoping the rest of the room and the pedestal out, I checked for some traps. I attempted to open the chest. As I went to open the chest, there was a flash of light, and I was transported into another part of the room. Now, I actually thought I was transported into a different room that looked exactly like this one, but that wasn't the case. And so I attempted to open this chest several times, but I could never figure it out. And the rest of the party, they kept going. So I didn't want to get too far behind, and I wasn't really sure how this game was played, so I didn't want all of the attention on me. And so they had advanced further into the castle, and I didn't want to get left behind, and I left the chest. And the DM never told me what was in that chest or how the trap worked or how to overcome it, and that still haunts me to this day. So first tip of the day is some mystery. Leave things unsolved. In worlds with dragons and ancient ruins and forgotten empires and magic artifacts, mystery is good, both in and out of the game. If someone doesn't know how it works or how to get through or overcome something, or maybe they don't put the clues together that you have provided, that's okay. That's not a bad thing. It can be a good thing. Narrative tension is built on things like the unknown and failure. When you succeed all the time, it's just another win. Or if you know you'll get the answer later, it doesn't matter as much. So build some mystery, allow some failure, and if you fail, embrace it and use it for your character. D&D doesn't have a save game setting, unfortunately. Some of the greatest moments at the table that I've experienced have been from failure. And so that's okay. Failed spectacularly, as they say. So back in Adventureland, we continue exploring the castle, and we're fighting these lizard men. And at some point, we had a decision to make, and I can't really remember the details. If it was like, do we go up in the level of the castle or maybe down? It could have been as simple as left or right, for all I remember. Or maybe it was whether we rested or not. But regardless, I'm unsure. The group starts discussing out of character what our next course of action is, and then it kind of digressed into conversations about the real world and out of game stuff. The DM Dale, he's struggling to get things back on track. He looked at me, and I really don't know a lot of these kids. I'm younger than them, and so I feel like I really didn't have anything to add about the conversations that they were talking about. I look at him, and he looks at me, and he looks at the rest of the group, and he looks back at me, and then he kind of leans over the table and he whispers and he says, "Hey, you see a bag of gold sitting over there in the corner of the hallway?" And I'm like, well, actually, he just says a sack. I don't know what's in it. And so I'm like, well, I'll kind of subtly move over there, just kind of take my time. I don't want to just run over there. And I found that it was full of gold coins, maybe like 20 or 30 gold. Now, the other players, they sensed that they were missing something, and they asked they asked the DM if they saw me go to the sack. Excuse me. The DM said no. They ask if they can roll for it, and again, he just says no. So maybe that's the second tip. Reward your players. I see a lot of the questions online is how do I deal with X and X situation at the table? Not in the game, but at the table. And I found that if you want to have a good culture around the table, reward players for when they're doing things like paying attention. Now, anyone can get XP from killing monsters. Anyone can outwit a deep-dwelling madman for a magic ring that turns you invisible. But how many times have you rewarded them because they were being a good human at your table or in life? It doesn't always have to be a sack of gold. I mean, everyone loves appreciation, so when they do well, give them an attaboy. Maybe I'll do a video on non-standard rewards at some point that you can give to your players and their characters. Meanwhile, back in Fantasyland, as was kind of fitting with the older modules that TSR put out, some of the dungeons didn't make sense. Like how a monster got there or why this particular architecture construction was in the middle of a dungeon. Nobody really knew. And even though this was Dale's dungeon, even though he designed it, it was pretty typical of what we saw. So we're going through this castle. I don't know how many levels we had gone down, at least 2 since I had started playing. So we're going down in levels, and then we come to an arena, right? We come to this giant arena of sorts, and in the center are these 2 knights in this heavy black armor. And one of the other players I was with, he says, those are death knights. That didn't mean anything to me except it sounded awesome. And there's a giant with one ugly eye in his head. Now, FYI, they weren't really death knights. They were just fighters in this black plate mail. But they would actually be a reoccurring kind of theme in the campaign, these black knights. But we always just called them death knights. And this was way before I knew about that creature in D&D. So combat ensued, and it was tough. And I mostly stayed out. I was a couple levels lower than the rest of the PCs. I think I was like 3rd, and everyone else is between 5 and 7. The magic user, Neil Hornsby, he might have been 8, but I don't remember at this time. So the 2 knights go down, and then we're fighting the Cyclops. Well, then our dwarf, he gets crushed by the Cyclops' club. We had 2 clerics. One of them gets hurt really bad too. And he was mostly injured by the knights, I think. While the remaining PCs, they kind of try to deal with the Cyclops. One of them suggests that I go and loot the bodies of the knights to see if they have a healing potion. And so I didn't really know I could do that then, but I sure that's what I did on my action. So I sneak over there and I look for a healing potion. I found a potion. Although I didn't know if it was a healing potion. I have no idea if it would heal the cleric, right? But I gave it to him. So mystery, right? You don't know. The unknown, that builds narrative tension. Again, I was rewarded. I also found this hand axe that looks like, this is the Dungeon Master's words, it has an incredibly sharp edge and it's etched with strange symbols and runes. So we have another PC take a serious wound and he's close to death. The cleric, he drinks his healing potion, he comes back up. The other cleric heals some other guy and they kind of retreat. So only the Cyclops and fighter are remained. And the fighter's probably going to die if the Cyclops lands another strike. So it comes back around to my turn, and I'm wanting to keep my options open. I'm looking at the stats for the axe, and I see that hand axes can be thrown as well as used in melee. And there was kind of a collective sense that the Cyclops must be close to death as well. Now it's my turn, but after me, I know the Cyclops goes before the fighter gets to go, and none of the players can heal him. So if the fighter gets hit, it's game over. In desperation, I threw the hand axe. The DM generously allowed me to use my backstab ability. I'm not quite sure that it worked on ranged attacks. There's still some debate if it did or not back in good old AD&D. So I roll natural 20. First natural 20 in my life. The Cyclops falls, my hand axe buried in the base of its skull. It was dead. Few things have equaled that experience at the table. I was even more amazed when the hand axe returned to my hand after being thrown. And this is kind of our final tip of the day, I think. Let your players be heroes. I mean, let them be heroes. I'm fairly certain that I didn't inflict enough damage to actually cause the creature to go to 0 hit points or below. But it made sense in the flow of the action. And it is a moment that has stayed with me for over 25 years. In fact, it's one of the formative experiences in my life, I think, and definitely the hobby. So for players, take a risk sometimes. Sometimes you'll fail. We have a tendency to want to do things at maximum efficiency. We want to go into every encounter at full health, at full spells, at full, we want all of our resources. Man, just take a risk sometimes. Not just in combat either. Grim heroes are kind of cooler when they have chinks in their armor, right? Like every Samson has a Delilah, and Superman has his kryptonite, and every Lord Soth has his hubris. When you know why they're wounded, why they look at the world through the lens that they do, when they step to the ledge, fail or fly, it kind of makes the game worth playing. And this is ultimately, whatever else you think D&D is, it's a story of tension, of conflict and overcoming or failing that conflict, right? So that was my first experience with the game, and needless to say, I was hooked. And I hope you enjoyed the story and kind of the few tips I had for you. You can tell me about your first session playing in the comments if you want. I would love to hear them. I enjoy hearing about people's first experiences with the game or any experience with the game. So until we next meet, game well.